Good evening, everyone. Severe weather Team 9 meteorologist Nathan Chant joining you for this edition of Nate at 8. And coming up for this edition of Nate at 8, we're going to be tracking some of these lingering showers that are still in place coming to an end early on tonight. Most of us have already seen much drier weather for this evening, but some of these lingering showers still in place. And again, we'll track them here in a minute. They'll be coming to an end rather quickly, likely as the sun sets here early tonight. And from there, the big story, not as humid and mostly dry. That is the story for a lot of the remainder of this week. The exception can be by this weekend as we start to see an uptick in that heat and humidity. But here near term, we are enjoying a much drier and a more tolerable humidity levels and not as bad. It's still warm, a bit muggy, but it's certainly not real excessive like it has been for a lot of the past couple of weeks. So thanks so much for joining me for this edition of 8 at 8. Some of what we're going to be talking about coming up. Without further ado, let's jump into things, shall we? Our current temperatures right now in the 70s, and we are very close to where our high temperatures were for this afternoon, remaining in the 70s due to that cloud cover and rain that we had in place. This is actually the coolest afternoon that we've had going back to June 16th. It's been since the middle of June, the last time that we dealt with temperatures this cool. Now, of course, we all know that it was not a cool, comfortable 70s, right? It still was unbearably humid going throughout the day, and dew points were in the 70s for most of the day, now falling in the upper 60s, but that's still just a muggy range of these dew points continuing for this evening. And evidence of dealing with those dew points even in the 70s were the overnight lows last night into this morning. So our low temperatures this morning: 71 Wheeling, 71 New Philadelphia, 72 Pittsburgh. Good evidence there that just dealt with that warm, muggy night last night and just unbearably humid conditions for most of the day, and very little warming, really just a handful of degrees of warming for the most part. What we had for the start of today going into then this afternoon. And what we have for tomorrow morning will then likely be the coolest morning in a couple of weeks. So again, this afternoon, the coolest morning since the middle of June. And I think tomorrow morning, this afternoon, the coolest afternoon and since the middle of June. And I think tomorrow morning will end up being the coolest morning we've had in almost 2 weeks, as we see those low temperatures finally fall back below even the mid 60s. I think there's a chance for that. And why? Well, we're finally getting a relief from the unbearably humid conditions, and the lower dew points in the dry air is already in sight. 62 for dew point Cleveland, 58 Detroit, 58 Indianapolis. So some of that drier air is already in sight, looking further towards our northwest, and that will continue to move southeast into the area as we go throughout this evening, as we extend then going into, again, for a lot of the remainder of this week, we're noticing that drop in that humidity in place. So with respect to what's normal for the start of July for today, certainly was nowhere near the average high and the average low as we trended below the average high and we trended well above that average low for today. But on average, it's mid-lower 80s for highs, mid-lower 60s for lows. The full moon coming up is the buck moon. That's just given the name from when male deer start to typically grow their antlers, as they typically start growing them around the time of that July full moon. So it's the buck moon coming up on July 10th, our full moon this month. Also see that sunset get earlier day by day throughout the month. So it's 8:55 for this evening. It's 8:37 by the end of the month. And I mentioned this before, but typically we don't think about it, but technically during our summertime, which is after the summer solstice, we technically start to lose daylight, and we actually technically gain daylight then after the winter solstice. So during our winter months, we're gaining daylight. During our summer months, we're losing daylight. And this month, no exception. We'll see that sunrise go from 5:57 to 6:20 and 8:55, the sunset to 8:37 p.m. And don't typically view it that way, but that is technically what happens following that winter and summer solstice. We would typically think, well, those days are getting shorter in the winter, but technically getting even a little longer. It's a gradual process, right? I think that's the reason why we don't typically think of it as just a gradual process that occurs after the summer solstice, a gradual process that occurs after the winter solstice. Austin and Renee joining us this evening. Good evening to both of you. Austin saying the rain and wind was wild this morning. I'm hoping that the 4th of July is going to be a lot calmer this Friday. Also, what was the monthly temperature average for June? Well, Well, fitting that, Austin, we jumped into your comment as we're going to recap that right now. And Renee, good evening to you. Good evening to both of you and everyone tuning in. So June recap. So we discussed a bit about what we typically see going through the month of July. Of course, typical is sometimes not what occurs. And June, certainly a good example of that. We were nowhere near averages when it comes to dealing with precipitation and temperatures. We were above for both, and nearly an inch above precipitation for the month of June, going down as the 16th wettest, and the temperatures about 4 degrees, just shy of 4 degrees above normal, just shy by 0.1 degrees, 72.8, and actually tying what we had for last year as well. So the average high temperature for last June was 72.8, and that's exactly what we had for this year. And both are 7th warmest on record. So we tied last year for the 7th warmest June on record. Certainly what helped bump those averages up to that extent of last year for the month as a whole was the very warm stretch we had at the beginning, or at the end of the month. And looking at the last week, our average temperature was near 80 degrees, and it was 1952. That is the overall warmest last week of June on record for the Wheeling area, but we were very close to it, just shy of 80 degrees for that. It was just shy of 80 degrees of that average temperature for the last week of June. So that historically warm into the month of June helped bump those averages up overall for the month. And again, went down to 72.8, exactly what we had for last year, and tied last year for the 7th warmest June on record. So warm and wet. That was certainly the story. And at least here for the beginning of what we're going to be seeing for July, again, not as excessive for that heat and humidity, and a drier stretch of weather will greet us here for a lot of the first week of July. Hello there, Shane. Happy first day of July, everyone. Happy first day of July indeed. Thank you for joining us this evening, Shane. And we are still tracking some lingering showers and thunderstorms. Again, most of us are drying up. Really, at this point, the few showers that were in place towards Tyler, Wetzel County are tapering off. We're really just watching these showers and thunderstorms moving back into the area from the northwest, dropping southeast. So we'll watch these right now and moving into portions of Tuscarawas, Columbiana County, continuing to drop southeast. Now, we're not dealing with too much here in terms of, we're not dealing with any potential for flooding, severe weather, but really nothing that's impactful as we look into these locations. It's certainly still worth noting that there's some very heavy downpours within these, just like what we had earlier into the day. There's still some torrential downpours with these showers and thunderstorms dropping southeast back into the region. It's just thankfully, they're progressing fast enough and not going to be training over the same locations. And in fact, the intensity of these will likely start to diminish now here over the next couple of hours as they continue to drop southeast across the region. That still not anticipating any flooding concerns from this. We're not anticipating any severe weather from this as well. And in fact, we look at those wind speeds and see what radar is estimating out of these. And we're seeing radar estimate these wind gusts still upwards of possibly about 30 miles per hour. So, a little gust of wind with these. Certainly still a bit of a gust, but no damaging winds with those as they're dropping southeast in the area. Again, some heavy downpours. You may notice a gust of wind, but thankfully nothing that's going to be impactful as these drop southeast back into the region. And again, likely will taper off here in general over the next few hours. So they don't stick around too long. They don't. We'll see these taper off as we start to see, after we see that sunset here. You'll notice once we get past 9 o'clock, likely that those broken line of the showers and thunderstorms that are dropping southeast back into the region will be tapering off here early on tonight. And from there, a much drier stretch of weather lies ahead. Local storm reports some flooding east of our area into areas near Pittsburgh, Allegheny County, also dealing with some flooding as well as wind damage further south of our region towards Parkersburg, south of Columbus, into the south central portion of the Buckeye State. And we dealt with those, storm reports just out of our area. So thankfully, not dealing with a lot of impacts in our region for today. But again, just south and east of our area, we did deal with some more flooding and wind damage for today. And again, at this point, not anticipating any flooding, severe weather concerns, just some lingering downpours in those showers and thunderstorms moving back in. Again, maybe gusty wind upwards about 30 miles per hour, but not seeing anything that's going to be a big impact arriving here early on into the overnight hours. And again, you'll notice that even if we go back and slow this down. So Futurecast is picking up on these. I mean, it's not going to be perfect, but there is the model depicting that broken line moving back southeast. And I just noticed what happens with it as we extend past 9, 10, 11 o'clock. See how these likely will taper off. So again, they likely don't last too much longer after the sun sets. We'll dry back up early tonight. And from there, our attention will turn not to any additional rain, but actually some areas of fog, which can be dense for tomorrow morning's commute. We see a decrease in cloud cover, and we can get some areas of fog to develop in, especially locations, which was most of our area, but especially locations along south of I-70. Those areas saw heavier rain going throughout the course of today. It was a bit lighter than for locations further north of I-70s, but especially locations that saw some heavier rain going throughout the course of today can end up with some dense fog for tomorrow morning. So just something to note. This can be dense in spots, can slow you down. You may want to allow yourself a little extra time to get to your destination for tomorrow morning with that reduction in visibility. Low temperatures tomorrow morning, mid to lower 60s. Again, likely the coolest morning that we've had in a couple of weeks. And that is largely thanks to that decrease in the humidity. Finally, decrease in that humidity. Not to say it's refreshing. It's not refreshing. It's still going to be a bit muggy, but it's more tolerable. I think that's really the best way to put our stretch of weather now for tomorrow going into the weekend, is that this humidity level going through the 4th of July on Friday is more tolerable. I do think it starts to turn rather muggy this weekend. It's turning hot again this weekend, and especially by early next week and maybe even by Sunday, it can get back similar to the humidity levels we've had as of recent. So yes, as we look ahead, the humidity levels start to pick back up and it starts to turn hot again. But at least here near term, we're enjoying a pleasant stretch of weather. And really at most, the only thing to watch for would be an isolated shower and thunderstorm popping up into the afternoon and evening. And that's going to be it. This is a very quiet stretch of weather, and again, more tolerable humidity levels. And I think the best chance to see that pop up shower and thunderstorm would be going into Thursday and then going into Sunday. So again, these are still mainly dry days looking ahead, if not completely dry. We do have that chance for that pop-up shower and thunderstorm in the afternoon and evening. I think the best chance to spot those would be again Thursday as well as Sunday. Even then, it's not a guarantee, but there is that possibility for a pop-up shower and thunderstorm during that stretch. When it further picks up is early next week. Scattered showers and thunderstorms are looking likely. That's when it turns very humid, and highs at that point will be near 90. So hot, very humid, and we'll also be dealing with much better odds for those showers and thunderstorms into early next week. So the dew point forecast, as you can see, it's not to the blue, it's not to the green, right? Some of us, a lot of us would love to see that. I know. I mean, it would be great to deal with some more refreshing feeling air, but not the case for us this week, but certainly not real excessive. So keep in mind, for a lot of the past week and even 2 weeks, we've dealt with dew points near, if not in the red range, 70 up to 75, the mid lower 70s. That's where dew points have been for a lot of the week to even past 2 weeks. And we are not in that range looking ahead for tomorrow and even going through Friday for the 4th of July. By this weekend, yes, we can get back close to it. I think we can even reach to around 70 on Sunday. So we're going to get back closer to it by this weekend. And early next week, we are likely back mid to lower 70s. So we are likely back to some unbearably humid conditions early next week. But at least here near term, that relief is in sight. And like I mentioned before, what's always a good indication of that humidity, because again, not a lot of us are looking at the dew point forecast, but the test you can do at home this time of the year is this low temperature forecast. So look at what the low temperatures are forecasted to be. And if you're seeing these low temperatures around 70, there's a good bet that that is a muggy, a humid stretch of weather, which look where we go by the time we get into Sunday. And this will carry over early next week. We're back to near 70 for a low. Oftentimes this time of the year, the dew point could be the limiting factor to how much we cool. And as that occurs, the air becomes saturated and you can't see some fog develop, which is the case for tomorrow morning. But when that air becomes saturated, it becomes much harder for that air to continue to cool, oftentimes just becoming stable, hovering around that dew point. And so that's the reason why, especially this time of the year, this dew point is often the limiting factor to how much we cool. So even if you're not looking at the dew point forecast, you don't necessarily need to look at a dew point forecast to gauge how humid it's going to feel. Look at the low temperature forecast. And again, if you're dealing with those lows, upper 60s, around 70, that's where that more muggy, humid stretch of weather will reside. And yes, here near term, lows back lower 60s, showing that lowering in that humidity that will be in place going throughout a good portion of this week. Tammy says, no more rain, please. And yeah, good news for you, Tammy. I say thank you. Yes, some good news, Tammy, that the amount of rain is a lot less likely here through the rest of the week compared to what we had for today and even for yesterday. So Shane, yes, we can't quite rule out, that shower and thunderstorm in the afternoon and evening, but what we do see is more isolated going into the weekend. And again, the best chance likely is going to be Thursday and Sunday. But no guarantee. There's no widespread rain threat, but that isolated pop-up shower and thunderstorm can't quite be ruled out during this stretch. It's just mainly dry, if not completely dry, right? And a lot drier overall the rest of this week compared to what we had for today as well as yesterday. What's your perfect summer lower temperatures? My perfect summer lower temperature, so like a good low temperature for summer. Is that what you're asking, Austin? I would think that a good low temperature for summer is similar to what we're going to be dealing with here, these near 60, but I would say even 50s, I think would be a good temperature. You start to see it, which, we have not had good weather for this, but good pastime where maybe a lot of you like to enjoy, that I personally like to enjoy, is having a good campfire. Well, you don't want to be doing that when it's so warm and muggy outside. And thankfully starting to get rid of some of those warm, muggy nights here over the next few days. It's more friendly for some of those campfires, but especially if you can get those lows dipping to some cool values, it makes for some great campfire weather. So I would say that 60, maybe 55, 60, that range, not too far, I think, from where we'll end up with these lower 60s Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I think mid 60s and up is just not pleasant. You start to get into the more of those mild, muggy nights, especially these 70 plus lows. Oh, those ones are pretty brutal for those overnight lows. That's when there's just not relief from that heat, even overnight when the low is still 70 plus. But mid 60s up, it's still kind of mild, muggy nights. But if we get below that, closer to 60, especially upper 50s, that's some pretty good nights and some better sleeping weather, better weather to enjoy the evening outdoors. It starts to cool off after a warm day, and nice. Those are some nice low temperatures. And for the highs, I don't mind the 80s. These 90s though, I know maybe some of us enjoy it, but it starts to get excessively hot, and I'm out. I understand the 80s. It's summertime. We get the 80s. I personally like more 70s for temperatures if I had to choose, but yeah, these 90s, we've seen a lot of it as of recent. There's a hot and humid stretch to the end of June, and I think we can get back there for this weekend. We're back near 90, into the 90s Sunday, Monday. And yes, when we factor in the humidity, it's going to start to feel well in the 90s, maybe close to 100. We may get that heat advisory back into effect later this weekend, into early next week. And we see that increase in rain chances likely early next week as well. Better odds for those scattered showers and thunderstorms. So we're going to take this drier stretch and less humid stretch of weather while we have it in place. Again, by this weekend for the 4th of July, if you're making any plans outdoors, it does look mainly dry for a lot of the stretch, if not completely dry. There's not a big rain threat. We have that potential for a pop-up shower and thunderstorm in the afternoon and evening, but I think most of us are going to be staying dry during the stretch into the weekend, and then just watch early next week for better odds for those showers and thunderstorms with greater coverage likely developing in the afternoon and evening. Yes, it's hot. It's going to be a hot overall holiday weekend. I think highs even for Friday on 4th of July still well in the 80s, closer to 90 Saturday, Sunday. It can start to feel a little bit warmer than the actual air temperature, especially by Saturday. It can feel like it's into the 90s as we near it. By Sunday, it starts to get more excessive. It'll probably feel closer to 100 with those highs reaching just into the 90s, and it can be remaining quite excessive going into early next week as well. It's just unbearably humid likely by early next week as we deal with a higher threat for those showers and thunderstorms in place by early next week as well. Also, doing some digging, and I'll have it coming up at 10 and 11 o'clock also on the humidity. So I know we touched on and talked about some of the temperatures for the end of June and just how warm that was for June and how warm that last week that we saw was for June. Again, the second warmest on record for for the end of June for the Wheeling area. And I'm going to touch on the humidity as well. So dealing with these dew points that have been 65 plus and even 70 plus, I'll touch on just how rare it was for us to be that humid going into June, and especially the end of June. I'll let you know just how rare it was for us, what's on record for the Wheeling area with this unbearably humid conditions. And yes, I'll give you a preview. It was rare. It was historical. So we'll dive into just how historically humid it has been as of recent, not only for June, but even for the year as a whole. It's been quite historic. So we'll dive into that coming up at 10, 11 o'clock. I'll dive into more statistics on that humidity as we touched on the temperatures for this edition of Nate at 8. I appreciate it as always for tuning in. I hope everyone had a wonderful day. I know it was just dreary and wet. Temperatures again only warmed a handful of degrees due to the cloud cover and rain. But I promise there's some better days that lie ahead now. Tomorrow will certainly be one of them. Much more pleasant day tomorrow after some fog for the morning commute, and that will string together some pleasant days going into the weekend now. At this point, thankfully, we don't have to track severe threat, flooding threat, showers and thunderstorms that are more widespread in the afternoon and evening here for the remainder of the week. So thankfully, not going to be the case. Again, it's isolated pop-ups possible, but we're not dealing with that as high of a rain threat as today or yesterday here going for the remainder of the week. So thankfully getting a break from that and finally seeing the lowering in this humidity in place. Even for tonight, we're going to notice it as when you step outside tomorrow morning, you're likely going to notice a big difference with respect to this morning by tomorrow morning. Thanks so much for tuning in. Join me coming up News 9 at 10 on Fox 9 News 9 tonight at 11 for the latest. And until then, I'll see you on the next edition tomorrow evening. Have a good night.